Started. So welcome to our fourth class, I believe. And is it fourth? I think so. Could be third.
Yes, yes, it's fourth.
It's fourth. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and start with the prayers as usual. So we'll do the praise to Shakimuni Buddha. Do this 3 times together. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering as usual with the visualizing, making a vast pure offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And then Refuge and Bodhichitta before the teaching, which we'll do once in English and then twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodong soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodong soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penshir Sangye Duparsho. Okay, let's do a short meditation then. A few minutes of focused meditation on the breath as usual, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to set our bodhicitta motivation. So now to set our motivation, let's begin by really taking stock of the situation we find ourselves in currently. We can do that in terms of understanding our suffering, but tonight we're going to focus on understanding our amazing good fortune. And we're studying this text by Master Shantideva that was kept alive through the centuries, through the kindness of all of these amazing gurus, even up to our contemporary gurus, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who teaches on this text so frequently. His teacher, Kunu Lama Rinpoche, who gave him heart teachings on the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. All of the contemporary as well as prior gurus, going all the way back to Shantideva, who have kept this tradition alive, who have allowed us to be able to study this text. We should feel immense gratitude and also, like I said, good fortune that we live at a time where these texts and teachings still survive. And going back then to those who preceded Shantideva, Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna, all the great masters in the Indian tradition who propounded upon the Buddha's teachings, and of course Buddha Shakimuni himself. All of these highly realized beings that we depend upon in order to know the path, in order to know how to cultivate especially the wisdom realizing emptiness. You can kind of see them as knowledge holders, beings who attained realization of these teachings themselves, and then were able to disseminate them to others. And when we generate bodhicitta, this is really what we're aiming to do, to hold the Dharma in our own minds, to develop the realizational Dharma, so we then can impart the scriptural Dharma to others. So all of our studies are done with the intention of being able to do this for other beings. This is how Buddhas liberate beings, is not through some sort of magic spells or some sort of extraordinary feat. Instead, they impart the Dharma to others. So when we study this, we should be doing it with the aim of developing our own wisdom, our own understanding, so we can become very skillful in being able to lead others to develop the same wisdom, to be free from their own suffering, and moreover, to attain complete enlightenment. So therefore, we're going to partake of these teachings with that aim, to develop ourselves to the greatest degree so we can help others to have this knowledge. Okay, so maybe before, I think I've got a little time if there were any questions from the discussion. Was there anything that needed to be answered, addressed?
I think that it would be nice to have your insight on that 105, on that page 35 thing, because
Page,
I don't have full confidence. I completely understand it.
by page 35, what did you mean? I'm not
That's of
sure.
your slides.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Let me see if I can find it.
Was it the passage from the Minyak?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, let me go ahead and pull it up on screen, see what I can do. When I get there, let me know. Let's see. Let me share it first.
It's
Go
verse
to,
105 AB,
okay, so.
and it says the brilliant torch 218 to 219.
Okay, and then there was the commentary from Geshe Jampo Gyaltsen that also
Yes,
was in there. Okay.
one back, or at least two back.
So let's go through this real
Four
quick.
back. Yeah.
So again, we had this whole idea of if it exists after the object of knowing, if the sense consciousness arises after the object that it's knowing, from what is consciousness produced at that time? Of course, that one is pretty relatively straightforward, but then, yeah, maybe, was this the part AB
Yeah.
you said?
Yeah. I think Sneh had some questions about that.
Okay. What were your questions then? Maybe.
Yeah, because I was looking at it as a PDF, so I was going by the page numbers, which is what
Okay.
Richard was repeating to you.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm just seeing where you are. So
Okay.
this is
Let me put it back up then. So here
Yeah,
was,
it's Minya Kunsang, Brilliant Torch, page 218, where he says, how do we make this refutation? We
right, okay.
refute to, yeah, by
Oops.
ascertaining.
By ascertaining what is meant by this kind of origination. Is the consciousness produced first by the previous instant where the visual form has already disintegrated? Or second, by the instant where the form has not yet disintegrated? So if the form's disintegrated, then of course the consciousness that's arising, it's in relation to a form that doesn't exist. If it's at the same time, then again, we'll see the consequences. The first case is unacceptable, although the disintegrated visual form is, according to this tradition, an existent entity. We can talk about past objects being existent to some degree as past objects. As it is not the form source at that time, it cannot produce the I consciousness. If it could, then a burnt seed would be able to produce. Again, this is in the context of inherent existence too, though. I mean, so it's not just in terms of ordinary arisal of things, because we do say that an I consciousness is generated in relation to a form source that existed just prior to it, because it acts as the cause for it. But the idea here is that if it's inherently existent, we have those consequences. And secondly, if the consciousness is produced by the non-disintegrated form, the form hasn't disintegrated, you have it kind of concurrent with that consciousness, simultaneous, then or I guess they're not maybe necessarily simultaneous because you have options, but it's not disintegrated yet. That moment hasn't passed. Is there an interval in time between them, or isn't there? In other words, is there some gap that would exist between that non-disintegrated form and the consciousness arising on the basis of it? If there is a gap, whoops, it keeps jumping. If there is a gap, then it would be impossible for the caused consciousness to actually be produced, because that gap in time would not allow it to be the moment or the form source that gives rise to that sense consciousness. Because it needs to be produced by something immediately preceding it, because that's what is happening in conventional terms. And if there is no interval at all, the previous and subsequent instants of time would be mixed and become one, in which case it would be impossible for there to be a preceding cause and succeeding result. Again, this consequence is more around the inherent existence of it, because if it is inherently existent, then they kind of meld into one, because they're if there's no interval at all, then they would be merging into that same moment, is the way I understand it. This is why I included Geshe Jumpo Gyaltsen's explanation, because I thought it was a little more concise and better. Let's just go through that real quickly. The consciousness comes from a previous cause. In general,
Don, I think you skipped a slide above.
Yeah.
This is the one.
This is the one I told you last week. I couldn't really explain it.
Oh, okay. Because I also couldn't understand it. Okay.
Yeah. No, last week I put that in there because it was part of the commentary, but then I thought afterwards I probably shouldn't have thrown it in there, because I don't know that I understand this. If each moment in time had two parts, one connecting and the other, it almost is like saying if there's kind of both of those, if there's A and B, I don't know. I couldn't really tell because there's no commentary on this commentary.
And Don, I think it has to do with the word mixed in the slide before it. I think that's what's meant by having to, it says, all the previous and subsequent instances of time would be mixed and become one. So then the next slide is a description of that. If each moment in time had two parts, because they're mixed together, and then one connecting, it would be divisible. And so I think that's all it means.
Then you would once more not have something inherently existent, because it's divisible into two parts, one connecting. And if I go to that previous one, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't want to noodle too long over this, because like I said, I'm not sure I completely understood it myself when I went through.
You answered my question, because I think that what I had missed was the immediately preceding cause.
Yeah.
If there's a gap, even if there's a gap, it's still not the immediately preceding cause, which you need to produce the consciousness.
Exactly, because we are always kind of knowing things on the basis of that object being a cause for the consciousness that arises subsequent to it. So we're never, in Prasangika Madhyamaka at least, we're never knowing something at exactly the same instant that it is appearing to us, because that's always the cause for the next moment, and so on. What we are seeing is the previous moment that was immediately preceding. But yeah, I mean, some of these arguments get a little, I don't know, kind of strange. And so thanks, Richard, for pointing that out. That could very well be what we were talking about in the regard to that, kind of following up from what was said there, that you have this the previous and subsequent instance of time becoming one. So the previous would be the connecting and the other non-connecting. I don't know. I'm not really sure. But
It's definitely weird.
you know, and this is the problem, like I said, is if I'd never shared it, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But at the same time, I threw it in there simply because I wanted to kind of keep it continuous with what was actually in there. And it's very hard to tell what is meant. This commentary is actually very good generally, but for some reason that passage just didn't hit home. So if we go to what, yeah, I guess you jump like Yeltsin says, if there's a gap between cause and result, if in our example, there is a gap between seed and sprout, then there is no direct production, because you have to have the seed ending at the time that the sprouts are rising. I mean, X is an immediate cause, just the immediate moment. This means it is not the direct cause producing the result. There should be another direct cause in between that produces the result. The second option is that there is no gap in between the cause and result. In this case, the cause and result would have to be the same, like a whole thing existing within a whole thing, the seed existing in the sprout, because there's no gap, so the two overlap and become one. Anyway, that's all that he said. He didn't go into the kind of alternative thing. So is there anything else before I go on to my slides? Maybe we should just
Yes,
keep moving
please.
on. Yes, one more?
Sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, we had a question on, please comment on verse 998.
Right.
And so, what we had sort of thought was, basically this is saying, you don't have an inherent independently existing subject, you don't have independently existing feeling, and that knowing this, that there's no inherent subject or object, then you shouldn't fall into, the link of craving and grasping. And, but we were saying, like, where we are at, like, how do we even sort of have some experience of this line of reasoning? Like, I mean, even though we kind of know it, it doesn't help with the craving and the grasping.
Yeah, well, and I think that all has to do with the power of our realization. If we aren't really targeting that self strongly enough, that we are believing in so intently, and we have believed in since beginningless time, then we still have that foundation. We still have that we're acting from. So I think it takes quite a while before this actually has that deeper impact. That's why we need the more temporal antidotes to all these things. For craving, it would be seeing the impermanence of these objects, that they change, they aren't reliable. We have to realize they don't produce any lasting satisfaction. They have unattractive qualities and so on. All those things help us to counteract our craving, I think, much more directly than thinking about the emptiness of the I and what have you. Over time, that will become stronger. But I think it takes a lot of familiarity and meditation on emptiness before we really have hit the target. And we know then that there's nothing that is supporting the craving that arises on the basis of the feeling that we experience and the person experiencing it and so on. If we really get that at a very deep level, then it'll be an antidote, absolutely. But it's hard to get it at that level.
Yeah. And also, like we were thinking, you think like, there is no experience of aggregates without a self. So you think, okay, but there's still pain and suffering, but, and then the mind kind of freezes.
Yeah, because again, I think we're not quite there yet, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes whatever time it takes, but just to recognize that, like I said, the temporal antidotes might be much more effective to counteract things, because they can be introduced with a greater understanding for where we're at. Because it's very hard, I think, to have that wisdom of emptiness being applied in those moments without it being quite strong. So at least my thoughts. Okay. All right, let's get back into the text then. And we're moving into a new section here tonight with verse 106. We're still explaining, of course, the selflessness of phenomena, the reasonings that lead us to that. We had explaining the selflessness of phenomena by way of the four close placements of mindfulness. We finished that last week. That was verses 978 through 9105. Now we're going on to the section that's called Refuting the Argument that the Two Truths Would Be Non non-valid. So the lower schools are essentially saying, you propounded the two truths earlier, but the way you've explained how you posit emptiness and so on is going to negate the two truths. So on page, let me go forward to where I'm at here, page 59 of Gyaltsab Je's commentary on chapter 9, we have the first of the outlines underneath this, refuting the consequences of absurdity. So there are 3 verses for this. The first one, this is the opponents. These are again, the realists, as they're often called, Svatantrika, Madhyamaka, the other middle way school, and below. In that case, conventionalities would not exist. How could there be two truths with respect to them? Moreover, they are also conventional due to another. How could sentient beings pass beyond sorrow? So again, when we start talking about what posits conventional truth, we went into that in great detail in that section. We see that it's worldly beings who are together with ignorance who are positing conventionalities. And so if we propound that they actually don't have inherent existence, which of course all the schools below Prasangika Madhyamaka say is necessary for mere existence, well, then we've negated those things existing that way, and we put the fate of conventionalities in the hands of people who are only positing things with ignorance. And so there's no real basis for conventionalities, and therefore there's no basis for ultimate truth. So both conventional and truth and ultimate truth get negated when this is the case. So let's look at the commentary on that in particular, just so we follow it verse by verse, the arguments being put forward on 59. Previously, object and object possessor, again, the consciousness or person, were refuted as inherently existent, having been labeled as earlier and later. Again, that the object is the moment before the object possessor and so on. In that case, the same fault would apply to their illusory existence. And as there is no basis for the designation of any phenomenon if inherent existence is impossible, the illusory becomes non-existent. So kind of again, the way that things are being posited according to Prasangika Madhyamaka is through a mind that is together with ignorance. This is how we posit our conventionalities. They're concealer truths. Remember when we looked at that earlier, veiled truths that are obscured with regard to the nature of reality. So if we're negating that they have any inherent existence, then in a sense, there's nothing that we can posit as conventionalities because they're together with ignorance. There's always when we refute that, we refute mere existence, according again to the lower schools. So as a result, how can the two truths exist on it? Because once you get rid of conventional truth, because you've negated inherent existence, then you've gotten rid of their ultimate truth, which is their lack of inherent existence, because that's no truth, because there's no basis upon which that truth is being posited. Again, you have to see this from the point of view of the lower schools, that once you start refuting inherent existence, it's as if you're saying things don't exist at all. And that's really just the perspective that's being put forward here. And we've been kind of wrestling with these guys the whole chapter. So it just says they become non-existent then. So then it says, in the case of, you accept that the objects of form, sound, and so forth exist truly to the perception of the illusion. Because I mean, again, if you have these sentient beings who think that these things exist truly, that's the illusion that's going on for them, right? That everything is being held in that way, even appearing in that way, which grasp at them as inherently existent, but that they lack true existence from their own side and exist in an illusory manner. If we look at this, then just as the rope lacks a snake from its own side, but exists as a snake for the perception of the grasping at the rope as snake, your illusory existence is posited through the mere elaboration as existent by another awareness. And again, a lot of words, but what it's essentially saying is that when you have this analogy that is frequently used in Prasangika Madhyamaka to refer to how we are grasping at things, and the idea is that if you see a rope that's coiled in a dark part of a room or something, and maybe it's even striped, and so for a moment you have this thing like, oh, there's a snake there. And it's only a rope that is being imputed as a snake, in this sense that in the same way, we can say that even a snake that is imputed on a basis that is posited as a snake conventionally doesn't have any snakeness on it in the same way that the rope doesn't have any snakeness on it. That's how it's used in Prasangika Madhyamaka. What they're essentially saying, though, is that if you start positing that all of this stuff that's established through this ignorance that is grasping at true existence, it doesn't exist truly, Well, it's like you've gotten rid of everything. Again, they don't have any way to uphold any sort of mode of establishing conventionalities, because everything is established with some belief in the inherent existence. And so once you get rid of inherent existence, you've gotten rid of the potential for conventional truths to exist. So it says, if this is looked at, then how can sentient beings go beyond sorrow even conventionally? Because how can they realize the lack of this and do anything? Because there's no conventional truth left once you negate inherent existence. It follows that liberation becomes impossible, because everything that exists has been established as the mere delusion of a distortion. If this is accepted, then it follows that to comprehend the view for the purpose of liberation becomes meaningless. And according to the lower schools, you put a lot of effort into realizing something that only causes you to kind of fall down into a precipice of nihilism, and that's the perspective of the lower schools, is that once you negate inherent existence or true existence, you've negated existence, and you now are nihilistic. You now are negating that things exist at all. And if of course, they all have their own way of positing what they mean by a sort of emptiness or selflessness. Let's go to what His Holiness says about this, because I did share a little bit of what was in, I think it's Transcendent Wisdom, which was the first published commentary by His Holiness. He says essentially, in short, if you say that something exists simply because it seems to be real to a deluded mind, nothing could be denied existence, right? Because people come up with, through their deluded minds, with all kinds of things that they think exists and think are real on the basis of their deluded mind. So if this is the criteria that, or criterion that Prasangika is establishing for developing the class of phenomena called conventional truths, is that they are established through ignorance, then everything that's established through ignorance, through a deluded mind, would end up being existent. So again, you have kind of two sides to this. You have the negation of things existing if you negate them as inherently existent, but you also open the bag for anything to exist, because it's all posited through the force of ignorance. And we have the second verse in this. This is the reply from Prasangika Madhyamaka. This is a conceptualization that is another mind. It is not our conventionality. So in other words, you're saying this isn't how we are saying that things are established conventionally. It's just whatever an ignorant mind posits is real. After that, after realizing emptiness, if still ascertained, it exists. People exist. Bodies exist. Oranges and apples exist. Everything that can be established conventionally, even after realizing emptiness, can still be ascertained. Therefore, it exists. If not, conventional existence would be non-existence, right? Because that's essentially the consequence of what the lower schools are saying. We would fall into the trap of a nihilistic consequence if that's what happens, if we negate everything through the force of our realization of emptiness. When you realize emptiness, you're negating a layer of superimposition that we have put on everything that exists. And that is through the force of our ignorance. But that can be removed without negating mere existence. But again, the lower schools, as do most people actually, even those following Prasangika Madhyamaka, have a hard time really getting at what is established as what exists. When we say something's merely imputed, this going back to what Sneha's question was, if we really get what merely imputed is, then there is no I that we sort of set up that has any kind of attachment or craving or anything towards those objects, because it doesn't exist substantially. It doesn't have any real existence, as Rinpoche often says. So this is the consequence, again, that the lower schools are putting forward. Let's go to Gyaltsab and see what we can discern from the commentary there on page 59. So the Madhyamaka response: when we refer to existing in an illusory manner, it is not the meaning of our own middle way system to assert it as that merely elaborated as existent by the mental superstition of true grasping, which is the separate awareness that is mistaken with regards to the grasped object. Regarding what is referred to as the illusory existent accepted by the Madhyamaka, it is that merely elaborated as existent by the mental superstition of true grasping, the awareness apart that is mistaken with regard to the grasped object, This is not the meaning of existing in an illusory manner in our own middle way system. Okay, a lot of words there and it's kind of confusing in terms of how those sentences are put together. What they're saying again is that they're not saying that it is what can be established by this ignorance that becomes existent. It is that with the mind with ignorance establishes existence on the basis of positing what is conventionally agreed upon. It's not that the mind of ignorance is actually doing the positing that we haven't, and therefore when we get rid of that, there's nothing else that exists. As I said, it's a superimposition we put on top of what exists. Remember, I explained previously, I'm pretty sure I did this, the way Lama Zopa often talks about how we have the ignorance arising. First of all, we see something that we label. And of course, we've learned the labels for so many things in our world, but there are new things that appear every now and then that we have to learn the label for. I think I may have even used the example of an iPad, say like when those years ago when an iPad was introduced, maybe you had never seen one and then somebody has this and you go, what's that? And they go, it's an iPad. And you maybe heard a little bit about an iPad. And all of a sudden the iPad, you've learned the label, but then it seems to almost merge into the object so that it appears back at you as if it's established as an iPad from its own side. That's the false appearance that happens on the basis of as soon as we learn the label for something, the way we've identified it seeps into and becomes one with the object or the basis, and then appears back to us as if it's real, as if it exists that way from its own side. Then we assent to that, we agree to that. But what's underneath the surface is a merely labeled object. There's no real iPad there. There's just the label iPad we're giving to that collection of stuff. And everything else is a superimposition. So what the middle way school is doing is they're saying that we are positing things together with a mind that is together with ignorance, but it's not that the ignorance is actually establishing things as a truly existent conventional phenomenon. That's the only way that it exists. So when we get rid of that, we then get rid of all existence. There's another layer again. There's a superimposition that is being put on top of this, this awareness that is mistaken with regard to how it exists and is overlaying true existence where there is no true existence at all. Although there is that false appearance, obviously, that plays a role in it. So then it says in our own system, the meaning of existing in an illusory conventional manner is because all phenomena posited as the objects of the view, realizing the mode of abiding, are realized as being empty of inherent existence, the illusory actions and activities of being generated, generating, and so forth can be posited as existing through being ascertained by valid cognition, prime cognition, in an unconfused manner. Okay, so what are all those words saying? We say that there is, again, an illusion going on. By all means, there's an illusory nature, which is that things appear to inherently exist, but they don't exist that way at all. And we grasp at them to exist that way, although that is not their final nature. What it means is that things still can be posited as existing on the basis of valid cognition that is a conventional valid cognizer. We're going to look at this a little bit later. I think it's actually in just a moment. How do we establish what determines conventional truths? I mean, we do have what we call conventional valid cognition, but what are the criteria for that? What makes something a valid conventional cognition? Because we are establishing again that there are two forms of valid cognition. We have conventional valid cognition that establishes conventional truths, that is just simply observing the world and making determinations. This is this, that is that, on the basis of agreed upon terminology, concepts, what have you. But then we have ultimate truth, which has a different valid cognition. It's an ultimate valid cognition that is looking for the final mode of existence of phenomena. It's not satisfied with just the mere sort of appearance of things and how they are established in terms of their conventional reality. It's looking deeper to how do they actually exist. And that's where the illusion sort of falls apart, is when we get to that ultimate valid cognition that sees that what appears to be inherently existent doesn't exist that way at all. So again, the system is really quite amazing. Tsongkhapa explains how the Buddha established these two truths. But we just have to understand that there is different modes of realizing the two truths. They aren't realized by the same sort of valid cognition. So let me start with what he says in Transcendent Wisdom, and then I'm going to share a little bit about, a little more about how conventional truths are established. Because this one here, it says the criterion for conventional existence is the presence of a mind that is unmistaken with respect to its chief object. In other words, if I'm establishing a computer or an iPad or a person or an Apple, that's unconfused. It's unmistaken. It's just positing it in terms of saying this is what we call an apple. It's using that terminology, but it's establishing that it has its conventional existence. So while ascertaining emptiness, when you have an ultimate valid cognition, one does not establish the existence of other entities, right? Because that's not the role of your ultimate valid cognition. It's to get at the final mode of things. It is looking at a deeper investigation of how things exist. It's not a mind like the valid, conventional valid cognizer that establishes the varieties of phenomena. It establishes the mode. It establishes the way that all things exist as empty of inherent existence. But upon rising from such meditative equipoise, if something appears clearly to the mind, if its conventional existence is not repudiated by any other conventional knowledge, if it is able to yield benefit or harm, and if it is established by verifying cognition, then it exists. If not, it does not exist even conventionally. So he's kind of talked about some of the criteria involved in here. Go through in a slide in a moment that gets into that. But the whole gist of this is that conventional valid cognition is perfectly fine. The way the world is reliable when it comes to simply positing this is this, that is that. And we can trust that to some level. But what we can't trust in regard to that conventional valid cognition is the ultimate, the final mode of existence, emptiness. That has to be known by ultimate valid cognition. And its role is not to, like I said, establish the varieties, all the various things in the world, the diverse phenomena that exist in the world. Its job is to identify the single mode in which all things exist, which is their emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, so this is what His Holiness says in the other book that hopefully you've been reading with this course. Conventional realities have the power to affect our lives. They cause pain and pleasure, for example. The question can be asked, what exactly are the Prasangika Madhyamaka criteria for establishing things and events as conventionally real or existent? And so we see that a threefold criteria are being set forth. They hinge upon the understanding that only in the aftermath of negating the intrinsic existence of things and events can we then validly and coherently establish their conventional reality. Because of course we have to be able to refute that truly existent things are conventionally real, right? Because those appear to our minds and are grasped at by our minds, but they don't exist. They have never existed, and we have to be able to refute them. So we won't really get at a true final understanding of how things exist conventionally until we have understood their ultimate reality. So these are the three. The first criterion states that things and events are validly established by valid experience or convention. As I said earlier, the world is perfectly fine at positing, corn and almonds and whatever, all the various phenomena that exist. I mean, they're totally competent in doing that. Conventional valid cognizers are simply awarenesses that identify what is all in our world. There's always a basis for something, and the basis is labeled. And that level of conventional cognition is perfectly fine. Again, it can be refuted by, as we're going to see, by other consciousnesses that perhaps disagree with that, who come to know something different, as long as there is something that valid that can be established on the basis of that. So we do have to kind of, again, look at different levels of even conventional awareness, because some things that certain conventional cognizers would be establishing might not exist even in conventional truth. So that's the second criteria. The second criterion states that the truth of their existence cannot be contravened by valid experiences. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama uses this example that's used often in Indian literature about a magician conjuring up an imaginary horse, an illusory horse, and an illusory elephant on the basis of like a stick and a pebble. If somebody walks in the room who wasn't there when the spell was cast or the substance was put on the eyes that caused this false appearance, which I guess is what they did in India at that time, then they know they can be like the conventional valid cognizer that sees, because they know that there is no real horse and elephant there, and that can be posited through the force of an unaffected consciousness that hasn't received those things that cause the false appearance. So we can say that there can be some things that appear to beings or are known by beings, posited by beings as conventionally real, that can be refuted by the conventional valid cognizers that know things in a more direct way, or a more honest way, or more correct way. So even things that, some spiritual traditions might posit as existing, the Buddha would say are refutable, because other valid cognitions that are conventional can deny those, can find a way to, disprove those. So there is that level of proof we have to go through, which is it going to hold up to conventional valid cognition, so that everyone, and again, we can't say that everybody sees everything absolutely the same way, because we know that's not true, but we're talking here mostly in terms of just establishing particular phenomena. This is this, that is that. If it can be refuted by another conventional valid cognizer that is knowing things incontrovertibly, well, then it isn't really a valid cognition you started with. It's actually being refuted. So let's go on to the third level. This is where we negate the truly existent computer and truly existent Apple and whatever. That's the third criterion, which states that conventional realities also cannot be negated by analysis into their ultimate nature. In other words, there is no true existence conventionally. That is not a conventional reality. That's not a conventional truth. So in this way, we refute. We say first, it's what beings are positing through their own everyday awareness, the minds of the world. We're going to give them some credence in the world in terms of positing this is this, that is that. But they can't go so far as to call something or designate something incorrectly, because conventionally that can be refuted, nor can they hold the things as existing in a fictitious way, because that will be negated by an ultimate valid cognizer. So we have two other valid cognizers that could refute what a conventional awareness is knowing, and thereby make that not a conventional reality or conventional truth. So it's not, again, that the first criterion encompasses everything. Oh, just whoever posits whatever exists, because we know that a lot of people posit things that don't exist at all. So that's the idea behind that. Let's go on to the last verse in this section. The conception and that which is conceived, the two are mutually dependent. We're getting back into this whole idea of mutual reliance, mutual dependence, which was mentioned earlier tonight as, what shows that things can't possibly exist inherently. In dependence on how they are renowned, all of the analyzed are expressed. So again, everything is posited through the force of an awareness. I mean, this is one of the most amazing things when we think about it, if we really sit down and contemplate, that when we do refer to these things as object, possessor, and objects, that these are posited together, that you can't have an object without an object possessor establishing it as an object. And of course, Prasangika goes to the extreme of saying, that's the only way really we can say there's an object. Sure, there's a basis for iPad or Apple or whatever, but we posit things through the force of the object possessor, the subjective awareness. But these two are mutually dependent. How do we, identify objects? Only through the force of an object possessor, only through the force of consciousness knowing it, and thereby the person knowing it. But there's no independent existence of these things. If there was, then you could have objects existing independent of a consciousness, and there's no such thing. Objects are known through the force of a consciousness. Right? Okay, so let's go through Gyaltsabje's commentary. It's fairly short, on the top of page 60. If it is not like this, and in our own system, actions and activities cannot be posited as being established by valid or prime cognition, then their illusory conventional existence wanes. Regarding the way of positing something as an illusory conventionality in our own system, both the object of the conceptual thought and the imputed object are mutually dependent. They are, again, different. We're not calling them the same thing, but they are mutually dependent. That is, they are positive relative to each other and do not exist in the slightest out of their own nature. This is explained in Nagarjuna's root wisdom, the fundamental wisdom. The actor is produced in dependence on the action. Can you have an actor like a walker without the walking? Can you have a thinker without the thought? Can you have, in terms of conventional reality, this is not, you can't posit things independently. Nothing exists independently. It always is existing in relation to something else. Even emptiness, right? Because emptiness exists on a basis. You don't posit emptiness as like the emptiness of inherent existence of what? It always is related to the phenomenon that is lacking that inherent existence. So then it says, just as being renowned to worldly normal prime cognition, they are all an analysis in dependence on mere name. That is, all presentations are simply expressions. So in this section, Prasangika Madhyamaka was trying to explain to the lower schools that we do still have a way of positing conventionalities. Conventionalities aren't completely negated by negating true existence, even though, yes, a mind with this ignorance is positing these things. That's not how we're saying conventional truths exist as these truly existent phenomena that then are negated, and then you don't have anything over on that side of the equation. You still have something that exists over here, but it exists as a dependent arising. It exists in dependence upon various factors. There's nothing that exists independently. So therefore, everything lacks inherent existence. These two sides of the same coin fit very nicely together. They complement each other completely. Everything is a dependent arising, therefore it lacks any independent existence. They completely complement each other in terms of the system of the two truths. So let me show a few slides that have to do with this. These are, again, from Brilliant Torch, I think, is first. Yeah, to say a little bit more about what this means, Minyak Kunsang Sonam says, when one seeks some understanding of the Prasangika view, because of the certainty regarding the appearance aspect, that is the interdependence, one necessarily has certainty regarding the emptiness aspect. Again, these two are complementary. Thus, only an individual who has gained the view will understand that emptiness means interdependent origination or dependent arising, different words for the same concept, tendril in Tibetan. Subsequently, as a sign that one has acquired a full understanding of the view, one gains certainty regarding the emptiness aspect. And this leads to greater understanding of the appearance aspect. As was said earlier, you don't come to understand conventionalities in their subtle way of existing until you've understood their emptiness, until you've known their ultimate nature. Then you can come back around to posit, well, how things actually do exist is only through nominal existence. And this is actually said in Nagarjuna in 2 verses this is a chapter His Holiness teaches on frequently, the 24th chapter on the Four Noble Truths. It says, whatever is dependently originated, that is explained to be emptiness. That, being a dependent designation, is itself the middle way. As I point out earlier, dependent arising is this perfect middle way between the two extremes. You don't fall into the extreme of grasping at everything as sort of being eternal and permanently existing, having that eternal quality of inherent existence because you've negated that with emptiness, but you also don't fall into the extreme of annihilating things, saying they don't exist at all. This dependent arising, that is the mirror, in a sense, of emptiness, the conventional mirror of the ultimate truth of emptiness, is the middle way. And then the next verse, that which is not dependently originated, such a thing does not exist. Everything is dependently originated, dependent upon causes and conditions, if it is impermanent, produced phenomenon, dependent upon parts, and dependent upon mere imputation. And that's all phenomena that fit into those categories. Therefore, that which is not empty, such a thing does not exist. Since everything is dependently originated, everything is also empty, because these two go hand in hand. Then continuing with Minyak Kunsang Sonam's commentary, because one realizes that all phenomena are inherently empty, one is all the more able to understand how conventional relative truth works. All this can be studied in detail in, again, Fundamental Treatise by Nagarjuna, in passages such as, for whom emptiness is possible, everything is possible, and the objection of the lower philosophical systems, if all these are empty, with the response, if all this were not empty. So I went and got the verses from that translation that I pulled the other fundamental wisdom verses, and they're all from chapter 24. Again, a really sort of famous chapter, really important chapter in that text. For them to whom emptiness makes sense or is possible, everything is possible. Everything makes sense, right? Because everything can arise within the sphere of emptiness. For them to whom emptiness does not make sense, nothing makes sense. The lower schools are all holding that things don't have an emptiness of inherent existence, that they actually do exist truly. Well, they can't posit a system that makes sense then, because how can things arise from truly existent causes? How can things have true existence in the ways that we've already been refuting with the previous refutation of inherent existence and the four close placements of mindfulness? Then the other verses that he referred to is this, the objector's position that starts off the chapter in verse 1 of chapter 24. It's essentially the objector saying, if all this is empty, there would be neither arising nor ceasing. And for you, it follows that the Four Noble Truths do not even exist, which of course is not a consequence, because the Four Noble Truths exist just fine within emptiness, because we just saw everything exists perfectly fine within emptiness, because that's what makes things possible. Without emptiness, things would not be possible. So that's the reply that's given in verse 20 of that chapter. If all this were non-empty, as in your view, then there would be no arising and ceasing, and it would follow that the Four Noble Truths would not exist. So it kind of turns the table back on the lower schools and says, no, it's only in your view that things have inherent existence, that they are not empty of inherent existence, that we have nothing arising and the Four Noble Truths not existing. Your system is the faulty one, not the Prasangika view. Okay, so let's go on and carry on with the next section. So that first one had to do again with refuting the consequence of absurdity, like the lower school is saying, that you've fallen into this extreme of nihilism because you've negated conventional reality by way of negating inherent existence. Now we refute the consequence of becoming endless. So let's look at this, verses 109 and 110. This is the lower schools again coming forward, the realists. When one analyzes by way of analysis that analyzes at that time, because that analyzer also would be analyzed, it would be endless. Okay, so these are once more, they get into this thing of saying, okay, you've got an analyzing mind that is analyzing phenomena for their lack of inherent existence, right? And this is what we're saying from the Prasangika point of view. That it is analyzing the eye, or it's analyzing, some other phenomenon, the body, feelings, all those things that we just went through. But it's not analyzing the consciousness that is analyzing, right? Because that's not what it's doing, right? It's analyzing some phenomenon that is being observed and investigated to see if it has any inherent existence. So they're kind of saying, well, do you need to then analyze the consciousness that is doing that or not? And they have faults if you say yes or if you say no. But of course, Prasangika has its own way out of it as usual, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's look at the commentary on 109, which gives us this, this argument being put forth by the lower schools. When the investigating analysis, which analyzes whether phenomena exist truly or not, discerns them to be empty of inherent existence, at that time, as it does not fall under that analyzed, it's not being analyzed. I mean, this is the analyzing mind that is analyzing. Does one need to analyze the non-true existence of the analyzing awareness or not? Do you have to go then to observe that? Then if you have to observe that, then you have to observe the consciousness observing that. Then you have to observe the consciousness observing the consciousness observing that, and so on. You end up with this infinite regress, because you always have to posit something else that is going to be analyzed, another new phenomenon that needs to be analyzed. If not, then it is the same for all other phenomena and their lack of true existence wane. So if you say, no, it's not necessary to do that, then you're saying that this awareness is truly existent in their view. Because they're saying, well, don't you need to apply the same analysis to that consciousness, because you're holding everything to lack true existence, lack inherent existence. So if you're saying it doesn't need to be done, then in a sense you're reifying the mind, the awareness, and thinking that the awareness does inherently exist while the things it's analyzing don't inherently exist. If you say yes, that it does need to be analyzed, then you have the infinite regress problem, right? Because the non-true existence of this analysis needs to be in turn analyzed by another analysis, there would be no end to the analyzing analysis. So you just with, layers and layers of analysis, because you have to analyze the mind that observed the mind to see if it was truly existent when it was knowing the non-true existence of, phenomena and so on. So again, but they're still working with this idea that there's something that they're not getting, from the Prasanga point of view. They're not really getting the full impact of when we say something lacks inherent existence, and we're realizing that in regard to whatever basis, that we then can apply it immediately to any other phenomenon. Nothing will withstand that analysis. And you don't need to have an analysis of the analyzer, the analyzing awareness necessarily, because once you are discerning emptiness of one thing, you're discerning the emptiness of everything. So let's look at the next verse, which is 110. Let me put that on the screen. I know we've got a lot of, the wording in this sometimes is a little strange too, I have to admit. When the objects of analysis are analyzed, a support for the analysis does not exist. Because the support does not exist, they are not produced. That also is expressed as nirvana. So we need some words to go with this, because this is, again, if you just put this verse on a piece of paper and ask somebody to comment on it, they probably wouldn't know what to say. And so that's why we have commentaries. So the Madhyamaka says, it follows that no other prime or valid cognition analyzing the lack of true existence is needed for the other prime cognition that's realizing the lack of true existence of all phenomena. In other words, you don't need, the answer to their question is it doesn't need to be analyzed, but they don't have the consequence that the lower schools said, right? That then, oh, you're holding it to be truly existent. Then, you're not going to analyze that because that's got some sort of superior status. So instead they say, no, it doesn't need to be analyzed, but that's because once you've discerned the emptiness of one thing, you've discerned the emptiness of all. It says, why? Because when the prime cognition analyzing the lack of true existence has analyzed the non-true existence of that to be analyzed, all phenomena, or let's say again here, the body or feelings or whatever, no truly existent subject that would be a basis for repeated analysis of non-true existence exists in the perception of that awareness for as long as it does not lose that mode of apprehension. In other words, for the mind that is realizing the emptiness of form or body or whatever it's analyzing, nothing will withstand ultimate analysis in the face of that. You don't find any inherently existent consciousness. You don't find any inherently existent anything. That's because, once more, we are analyzing a mode of existence that is the same for all phenomena. So once more, I referred to this earlier. When we talk about conventional truths, we talk about them as the varieties, the diverse phenomena that exist on the basis of all of the things that cause things to arise, all the causes and conditions that can be. Look at what we do in our world to create all the various things that we have. We've got all the same sort of raw matter, and we just keep melding it into new things and what have you. This is the diverse phenomena that exists in our conventional world. We do ultimate analysis to find ultimate truth. That is where we are looking for the mode, the way in which all things end up existing in terms of their final nature, which is the emptiness of inherent existence, the ultimate truth that is the same, whether we're talking about the object being analyzed or the awareness that is analyzing. There's no difference. Those are different in the view of conventional phenomena and conventional valid cognition. In terms of ultimate valid cognition and what we are discerning in ultimate truth, it's the same thing you find, which is the not finding of inherent existence, the negation of inherent existence. That is what emptiness is, right? So we can do that on the basis of a chair, a person, a piece of fruit, whatever, and we can find the same emptiness because it's the same mode of existing for all phenomena. That's why those are called modes. We can say that that emptiness is a unique phenomenon together with that phenomenon that it's with, that it is a part of, that it is the quality of. But nonetheless, it's the same taste as all other emptinesses. There's no differentiation at that level. So once more, it's like the lower schools aren't really fully getting the impact of what Prasanga is saying. And Prasanga is saying this is the final mode of everything. We're not just saying, oh, the consciousness is somehow different. And if you were to apply your ultimate investigation to that, you'd find the same truth about it. But you don't need to go to this infinite regress thing either and then analyze that and what have you, because once you've realized emptiness of one thing, you've realized the emptiness of everything. Don't have to apply any more reasoning because you're realizing that mode that is applicable to everything that exists, even emptiness, as I've pointed out earlier. So let's go back to actually, let's stay with the commentary then. I think I didn't finish this yet. So it says, the the next paragraph, also for the person who has realized all phenomena as empty of true existence, and for whom the realization holds and has not waned, a subject basis that is characterized by an analysis into true or non-true existence is impossible, because immediately upon generating that thought, the mindfulness thinking it does not exist truly is generated. So the way I understand is that previous, that I just explained, the paragraph above, was talking about when you're in that meditative equipoise. Of course, nothing can withstand analysis to that mind, because it's realizing that one mode of existence, of lacking inherent existence, that is the same for all phenomena. But even when you come out of meditative equipoise and you have the effect of that realization in your mind, well, nothing is going to withstand analysis then either. It doesn't need to, because you know that truth about all phenomena. When you come out of that meditative equipoise, if you grokked emptiness correctly, if you got it correctly, and you had that realization, then anything you look at, you know it doesn't exist in the way it appears. You know it doesn't have any inherent existence. So you don't have to go through an additional analysis to kind of go, oh, well, I found that was true with regard to the I. Now do I have to find it's true with regard to the aggregates? No, you already know it's true with regard to the aggregates, because you've seen it as truth with regard to the I, and you know that it's the final mode of all things. So I want to share here a quote from Aryadeva. Many of you know Aryadeva was a student of Nagarjuna's who wrote the 400 stanzas. And he says this exact thing in verse 191 in this published book. I think oftentimes they refer to it by the chapter and verse, though. And it's the 8th chapter. Whoever sees one thing is said to see all. That which is the emptiness of one is the emptiness of all. This is really speaking to that reality, and that goes back to one of the sutras of the Buddha, I think the Samadhi Raja Sutra, where he says, essentially, yeah, when you realize emptiness of one thing, you have realized the emptiness of everything. It's not that, again, you have to apply a whole new analysis to realize it in regard to something else. All these analyses are to get us to the realization of emptiness. Once you've realized emptiness directly the first time, you have the understanding that that is the final mode for everything. Yeah, it is a universal truth with regard to all things that exist. Okay, now we get to the final section in this. This is showing that there is, there was a little bit more on the top page. I'm sorry, we didn't get through all of 110. That was the first two lines of 110. And then we even have a little continuation of that. It says here, the fault of endless analysis is page 61 of Gyaltsab Je. The fault of endless analysis into non-true existence, despite having realized all phenomena as lacking true existence, exists for you, the lower schools, because of the necessity of another prime cognition having to analyze that very awareness. Remember, we saw this a bit when we were dissecting the mind-only school, and they were propounding self-awarenesses as being ways of validating other awarenesses and so on. And this is what he's essentially getting at. It's these lower schools. You're the ones that feel like you need to validate these awarenesses. Once, Prasangika says, once something is realized in terms of the emptiness of phenomenon A, then all the other phenomena can be realized as lacking inherent existence by virtue of that. You don't have to, again, have a valid cognizer knowing that cognition in order to establish it as valid. The mere experience of knowing it posits it in the mind. It doesn't need anything else. So it says here, if another analysis were needed, then there would remain a leftover of intellectually acquired true grasping, despite all manifest intellectually acquired true grasping being stopped by the earlier prime cognition itself. In other words, he's saying, let me back up a little bit. When you generate your first realization of emptiness directly on the path of seeing, what you remove, the layer you remove, I think I did distribute to everyone way back that chart that showed how you move through the 5 paths. If you go back to that chart, you'll see that what was removed at the path of seeing are what are called the intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions. This means that everything that you've acquired in this life through your being encouraged to reify things in the other philosophies or whatever that have kind of contributed to that mistaken idea that you're working with, that's not getting at the innate that we've carried forward from life to life. It's what we have built up in this life on the basis of false tenets and so on. All of that is removed on the path of seeing. And so you don't have any ability to kind of conjure up that again, because you've seen the truth. You've seen the emptiness of all phenomena, and not just in a, conceptual way. You've seen it in this non-conceptual, yogic direct perception of emptiness that influences your mind to no longer generate that ignorance. You haven't gotten rid of all of the ignorance yet, because you still have the innate afflictive obscurations. But you don't newly generate ignorance because you don't have any conviction in the way things appear. I think I've pointed out the analogy of a dream for our grasping at inherent existence. This would be like being a lucid dreamer all the time, where every time that you went into a dream state, you knew that everything that was appearing to you wasn't real in the way that it appeared. You would know that these are just dream appearances, and you would live your life from that point of view. Well, then you never would get caught up in all of it, right? Because all these beautiful objects appear in your dream, you don't have any attachment. Why? Because you know they're not real. And then all of these horrible, horrific, fearful things arise in your dream, and you don't get any anxiety or stress or, whatever, because you know they're not real. So we can't have the grasping occurring after the path of seeing. So what he's saying here is that if you do have some residual grasping happening, then you haven't really done the job. You haven't really realized emptiness directly. And the true emptiness, the emptiness that is the object, realizing the negation of inherent existence in the way that Prasangika puts forward. So essentially, the fault still lies on the side of the realists. The realists are the ones that are still not getting what we're talking about, that when we are removing that stain, we no longer conjure up any of that ignorance. You haven't removed it, but you never buy into it again. They say that the bodhisattva who comes out of that meditative equipoise has all these false appearances, but they don't believe in them for 1 second. Just don't have any credence given to them whatsoever, because they know they don't exist in the way that they appear. Okay, so we go on then to the last 2 lines of 110. Let's put this back on screen just so we can make sure that we know what we're talking about. I'll have to go back up here. Whoops, that was the Nagarjuna quote. So when the objects of analysis are analyzed, a support for the analysis does not exist. You don't have to go to that level of analysis because you've already realized emptiness of all things. Then because the support does not exist, they are not produced. That also is expressed as nirvana, meaning once more natural nirvana, which we've alluded to earlier. So we just have one little paragraph on this on page 61. Because the subject basis does not exist truly, both the object of negation and that negating are not generated inherently and are therefore called naturally gone beyond sorrow. Whatever part of the equation we look at, the object of negation, the basis for the object of negation, the consciousness realizing it, we don't find inherent existence in any of those places. They're naturally gone beyond. They are natural nirvana. Remember, natural nirvana is referring to emptiness. It's a terminological division of nirvana, because it is not a true nirvana, because a nirvana is a cessation, a state of having ceased the level of the obscurations in the mind, especially with the nirvana that those on the Hinayana path attain. It is having removed all of the afflictive obstructions. With regard to the non-abiding nirvana that bodhisattvas attain when they attain Buddhahood, it is with regard to both levels of obstructions, the afflictive and the knowledge obstructions. So again, a nirvana is that cessation in the mind that is the pacification of all of those disturbing factors and obscurations that have been completely removed. This is not that, but it is a natural nirvana because it's the object realized in order to attain nirvana. It is what we need to recognize, the emptiness of all things, which they naturally have. Once more, they've never had that. We merely impute things, but then we always are layering this on top, and this has never existed. It only exists due to our ignorance. We can say that ignorance exists, that's grasping at that inherent existence, but the inherent existence it's grasping at never did exist. It's all, fictitious and all an overlay of our ignorant mind. So then it says, realizing this and meditating on it is called attaining the liberation beyond sorrow, free from adventitious stains. So realizing that natural nirvana about the subject, the object, everything, even this false appearance, all of these things don't exist inherently. that is their natural nirvana. And by realizing that emptiness, their natural nirvana, that's how you attain nirvana. That's how you attain the liberation beyond sorrow, free from adventitious stains, that pacification of the mind. So again, they're just trying to hammer home to these realists that keep popping up, that it's all a very coherent system that the middle ways put together. It all is upheld by these fundamental truths that can be seen in terms of the way it's presented, and it holds water completely. There's no holes in it. So they keep trying to find holes, and they just aren't doing a very good job of it. So now we go on to the third section. Where are we at time-wise? Yeah, we still got a little bit of time. This is called Showing There Is No Proof for the True Existence of Object and Consciousness. Again, object and object possessor, these two phenomena that are interdependent. So let's look at what Shantideva says in this section. Verse 111. The two, being truly existent from their point of view, abides with great difficulty. So in other words, to try to find that you can posit a truly existent object and a truly existent object possessor is really hard, folks. You realize, you got your work cut out for you here, because even like we just said, an object, as it says here, is established through the power of a consciousness. The two of them are interdependent. So if they're interdependent, they can't exist truly. They can't exist inherently. What support would exist with respect to an existent consciousness? So again, the idea here still is that how can you find something that exists inherently? Because you would have to once more get into their whole thing of positing these self-awarenesses and all these other layers of consciousness that are totally unnecessary. Because again, the Prasangika system doesn't require any such hijinks and craziness. Let's go through the commentary on this one. It's all at the bottom of page 61. The first two lines, Gyaltsab Je says, regardless of the way that a realist looks at it, it is extremely problematic to assert that the two, object and object possessor, or consciousness, exist truly. Because there exists no proof. Well, and also because of what I said. I mean, they exist in conjunction with each other, interdependent upon each other. Objects are posited through an object possessor. Object possessors are always positing objects. Again, you don't ever have them completely independent, removed. Every moment of our subjective awareness has an object of some form that is appearing to it, that is known by it. That's why we say consciousness is that which is clear in knowing. It's always knowing. There's always something that is being apprehended. It may not be apprehended correctly, but nonetheless apprehended. So now the realist in that third line, let's go back to the quote just to make sure that we're sure what's being said here. An object is established through the power of a consciousness. Now again, Prasangika would take this in a very different way. The lower schools are putting it forward to say what Gyaltsab Je says, one can establish the meaning of true existence from the example of a truly existent primary cognition consciousness. They're still going back to the fact that you have a truly existent mind establishing a truly existent object. And of course, Madhyamaka says, what supporting prime cognition, what supporting valid awareness is there for the existence of a truly existent consciousness? You people are making this up. You're saying that you've got a truly existent consciousness that is establishing these objects, that is making them into, truly existent themselves. Well, where do you find such a support? Where do you find the awareness being truly existent with respect to an object? And he goes on to say there is not any, because once more, there's no self-knower. And if it is known by another consciousness, then once more it would become endless. You'd have this fault of infinite regress. So again, the lower schools are always going to try to posit that a truly existent awareness exists, a truly existent objects exist. But according to Prasangika, there's no such thing. And you can't posit that there's some other awareness knowing that and validating that. We're talking about, once more, this whole reliance upon valid cognition, which is really a cornerstone of the Buddhist system, and is upheld, again, to the greatest degree in Prasangika Madhyamaka, where they say you have to keep examining further and further to get to the real truth, to get to what the Buddha was driving us to understand about the nature of things, which is the valid cognition that knows that things don't exist inherently. And so any other thing that you think is positing things as being truly existent isn't going to withstand that analysis, or the truly existing consciousness that you're holding to. Again, you have this infinite regress that occurs if you start positing these awarenesses that are, this is validating that, then you need that to validate that, and that to validate that, and so on. But the idea is you don't even find the basis to begin with. The support is not there. There's no truly existing consciousness establishing truly existent objects. That was the introduction to this by Shantideva, saying, you folks can work really, really hard, but you're going to have a hell of a time trying to find a truly existent anything, because no such thing exists. So then we go on to let's go to the verse 112, and then we'll go through the commentary. Nevertheless, the consciousness is established from the object of knowing. Kind of, they're going to the other side of it, and they're saying, well, yeah, the consciousness also is established from the object of knowing, and therefore, you have true objects of knowledge and true comprehension. And the Prasanka reply is, what can be supported on an existent object of knowing? Existing by the force of one another, both would also not exist. If you say that they're truly existent, they can't exist. If they say that they exist, they depend on each other, well, then they have to lack true existence. You can't have it both ways, folks. This is the problem, is that the lower schools, really don't get the whole idea of mutual reliance, that things depend upon each other and therefore lack inherent existence. So the first line was the realist, retort, and then they say, but consciousness is established through the direct perception of true objects of knowledge and comprehension. So they're essentially falling back on another way of saying, well, but these objects truly exist, and so a truly existent consciousness is established on the basis of knowing those objects. They were saying before that the truly existent consciousness or object was established on the basis of a truly existent consciousness knowing it. So they're trying the flip side, but it's not working, obviously. The middle way says, what support is there for the existence of object of knowledge? If it is posited by a prime cognition, a valid cognition, then it is certain, because both object and consciousness exist through the power of mutual dependence or mutual reliance. It is clearly established that, again, both do not exist inherently, like long and short, or here and there. Can you posit something, if I held up this thing and said, oh, this bell ringer is really long, you'd be like, well, in relation to what? In relation to, let me find something else on my table here. Well, that's longer than it. Okay. In relation to the bowl. Okay, so it is longer than the bowl. And the bowl is shorter than this, but you have to have two things in order to posit that, right? You need mutual reliance. You'd have something that is longer than an object that is shorter than it. And you don't only posit long and short in relation to that. What was the other one? Here and there. If I say that I'm here, well, and I'm not there, well, you have to have kind of this relationship to two different things, right? I'm only here in relation to there. I'm only there in relation to here. Anyway, this is how everything is posited, and we're going to get an example of that in the next verse, which has to do with the whole thing of positing a father and a child, or a parent and a child. Can be non-gender specific about it. This is a last little tack on for verse 112, though I am sharing a little from the Brilliant Torch. It says, in establishing that both object and consciousness exist by virtue of their dependence on each other, you are approaching our method of asserting phenomena. As I was saying, you can't have it both ways. If you actually say that they are posited in relation to each other, then we agree with you. And that shows that they don't exist truly. Neither consciousness nor object exists truly. Because once they depend upon each other, you've thrown true existence in the garbage can. It is like asking, how long is a piece of string? Is it really long? Is it short? And you have to have something to compare it to. We're talking about here and there. As we read in Fundamental Treatise of Nagarjuna, something inherently existent is not fabricated, nor is it dependent on anything else. Nagarjuna says right there, this is what it would mean if something were inherently existent. It's not fabricated, produced by causes and conditions. It's not dependent on anything else. It exists on its own, self-established. Anything inherently existent is not fabricated from causes and conditions, nor is it dependent on other things. But anything fabricated and dependent on other things is an interdependent phenomenon, and therefore, of course, lacks inherent existence. Therefore, these two, the inherently existent and the fabricated, cannot be put together on a single ground. There's no basis where you could posit both of those together because of the plain contradiction between fabricated and non-fabricated, dependent and independent, things which are mutually exclusive. If something depends upon something, it can't be independent. And that's essentially what inherent existence means. It's independent. It's able to establish itself, existing from its own side, by way of its own characteristics, all these ways that we described that false concept that we are adhering to. So then we get this example. Again, if they are without a child, let's make it non-gender. If they are without a child, they are not a parent. From where would that child arise? Without a child, there is no parent. Likewise, the two do not exist. So we see that these two are dependent upon each other, right? You don't posit somebody as a parent without there being a child. I mean, I'm not a parent because I never had a child. So essentially, that is not a label that would be appropriate because it's an interdependent thing. You have to have someone who is your offspring in order to consider yourself a parent, right? And you have to be you have to have that child posited in relation to, you have to have a parent and posited in relation to the child being posited. It's only a child if you have somebody who's called a parent. And if you're never called a parent like myself, well, then there's no child. The child doesn't exist. So I don't need to give much more explanation. It says, if there is no child, then the parent is not an existent, because that which is defining the parent does not exist. As there is no cause, if there is no parent, from where does the child arise? And if there is no child because there is no parent, then the two are mutually dependent on each other and lack true existence. The two, object and consciousness, lack true existence in the same way. Right? You don't posit object without an object possessor. You don't posit object possessor without an object. I think I'm getting blurry here. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. Am I getting blurry? No? Okay. Maybe it's just the way it's looking on my screen. So, all right, let's go back and try to finish things off so we can let this part go. We've got one more verse in relation to this. I think two more verses, I'm sorry. Maybe we need to stop here because we actually we're getting into a little bit more with this. Again, I always hate to stop right in the middle of a section because we have to pick things up a little bit more, but I'm afraid we're going to go over. Let's go for it. Okay, just as a sprout is produced from a seed and the seed is realized from just that, likewise, due to a consciousness that is produced from an object of knowing, why would its existence not be realized? This is once more the lower school seeming to have like another in, like, whoa, did you think about it this way? And let's look at what the realists say. This is in page, actually, yeah, let me use Brilliant Torch. I think I put them in the slides. You might say an inherently existent sprout arises the effect from its cause, a seed, and the evidence of the sprout makes it possible for us to understand the inherent existence of the seed. Once more, they're equating inherent existence with existence. They're saying if you say there's a sprout, well, it had to come from somewhere. It had to come from a seed. Well, if it's a truly existent sprout, inherently existent sprout, well, then it came from an inherently existent seed. Which again, they're not getting it. It's like, I don't know. I get tired of these sort of arguments that they don't hold water, obviously. Similarly, the truly existent I consciousness, which arises from visual forms, necessarily reveals the true existence of the visual forms. Thank you for playing, but you're not there yet. Verse 115, if by a consciousness that is different from the sprout, the seed exists would be realized, then by what would the existence of a consciousness realizing the object of knowing be realized? Once more, they fall into this thing. How are they validating these awarenesses? If they're saying that we can posit that through the force of a consciousness, well, your analogy does not hold, Minyak Konsang Sonam says. It is a consciousness which is different from the sprout itself, which observes the sprout and infers that because there is a result, there's also a cause, right? It's not that it's got some sort of inherent existence on its own. The sprout is perceived and the seed is inferred by virtue of the consciousness that is observing that, knowing that it came from that seed. But what valid cognizer will cognize the truly existent consciousness which reveals its object? We have already shown that for the mind to know itself is impossible. Self-cognizers are impossible. And you do not accept or posit any other cognizer. So essentially, they fall into this same trap where they could keep trying to put forward that there's some sort of valid cognition that is seeing these things and saying true existence exists. The true existence doesn't exist to any valid cognizer. The valid cognizers that establish conventionalities are only positing conventionalities. They're not positing truly existent conventionalities because those are not valid cognitions. All of that can be refuted by an ultimate valid cognition. Therefore, true existence of sprout does not exist. True existence of seed does not exist, and so on. So you can't posit an awareness that is validating true existence. That's what they were trying to do by this example. Oh, I see a truly existent sprout. Well, it must be a truly existent seed that preceded it. And again, it doesn't make sense in terms of everything we know about dependent arising, but they seem to keep latching on to this idea that what we see, we can believe. And of course, there is that thing we have to understand. As I was explaining earlier, there's a false appearance. Everything appears to inherently exist. It appears to have its own identity established on its own from its own side. But that's a false appearance as well. That's why I do think, talking about to Sneha's question earlier, that's why it's also so hard, is because things are appearing that way to us all the time, right? We don't even know what it's like to have that appearance disappear, for it to be kind of not seen by that ultimate valid cognition. We're still continually convinced that everything exists in the way that it appears. So anyway, that's maybe too many words for tonight. But any questions from tonight? Were there any questions in the chat box? Oh, you got Professor George Dreyfus. Wonderful. Okay. Maybe I'll have to tune into that, except I think I'm busy that night. Okay. What, no questions? Yeah, Jennifer, please.
Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm going to explain this correctly, but the questions have been coming up. So I'm thinking about conventional valid cognizers, and I'm thinking about the death process and the things that we hear all the time in terms of, you have the subtle mind and then the subtle wind, and they always, travel from lifetime to lifetime as if there's an inherent existent universe in which they travel. And then you hope that the consciousness goes up through the crown of the head. And then there's the Bardo period. But I'm trying to think of this all from a conventional perspective and an ultimate perspective. And I'm just wondering, how I can make more sense of this from a conventional perspective. It's like a conventional human perspective, is that advice geared towards someone who is helping someone die, and then, from an ultimate perspective, how do we even see, or how do we perceive this, quote unquote, ever enduring, subtle mind and subtle wind riding upon each other from lifetime to lifetime?
Again, this gets into the territory of just talking about how things can still have a causal process. They still arise in dependence upon various factors in spite of their lack of inherent existence. And so everything can be upheld. Karma can be upheld. Rebirth can be upheld. The subtle consciousness can be upheld. Everything can be upheld within emptiness. That's that quote from Nagarjuna we saw earlier. For the person for whom emptiness is possible, everything is possible. Everything has its conventional existence still. But we're not making it into something that is inherently there or truly there. But there's a basis for it, absolutely. There's always a basis for everything that exists. And the basis for the subtle consciousness, the clear light mind, and well, let's talk about the clear light mind, then we'll talk about its mount of the wind. The basis for it is the continuity of moments of that clear light mind, which are all clear and knowing, and in this case particularly, lacking any conceptual mind. That's what the clear light mind is all free of, and whatever. But that's the basis for it. There's always a basis that we can point to. And so there's never any sort of substantial reality in regard to the continuity of the clear light mind, the subtlemost consciousness. Nor if we examine the subtlemost wind that is its mount, we find only a basis for that we are labeling it as that. And the basis of course, is the continuity of energy, single moments of energy that allow the mind to know things, to move in, from life to life, and whatever the case might be. So we can still posit cause and effect within emptiness, because nothing is being refuted in terms of its functionality or in terms of its mere arising, only refuted in terms of this false conception that we have towards those phenomena. the overlay that we put on top of them. So I don't know. I mean, does that answer your question, or does it lead to more questions?
No, it helps. Thank you. I guess my question is, then we look at the basis, but then that's conventionally existent too,
Sure.
right?
Sure. So we never find anything kind of that's like the you point to, and that was the whole lesson last week about these like partless particles and all this stuff. Like you can't get to this place where you go, there's something that is real, that is existing on its own, that is self-established, that is completely, kind of able to withstand all that analysis. Everything, once more, you always find something more that it is based on. It never holds up. It doesn't lead to any sort of concrete conclusion. So it's a slippery slope, obviously. I mean, we can't get to a nihilistic point of view where we think, therefore, these things don't exist at all. We have to really understand that subtle way that they do exist, that they are nominally existent, existing merely through the force of imputation. And that's perfectly fine. They've always existed that way, and they function just fine that way. We're not getting rid of their functionality by realizing they don't exist truly or inherently. We're only getting rid of this false overlay that has caused us to have a wrong relationship with these things, because we put all of our faith in getting all of those wonderful things to satisfy us and avoiding all these other things to, make us happier and less suffering, whatever. And we get totally caught up in it from the point of view of this misconception that we have about ourselves, about all these phenomena. So if we get rid of that overlay, you haven't negated the mere existence of things, but the way they exist is so subtle. I mean, I've said this before, Rinpoche says it's almost as if you don't exist. Almost as if. But I wouldn't say it is that you don't exist, because then we would fall into the nihilistic extreme. Instead, it's almost as if you don't exist, because we're talking about existence being very, very slight. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. No, I'm sure I'll have to just meditate more. It's on my side. It just, maybe it came up to me in the death process because you started about conventional consciousness. Then I'm thinking about conventional consciousnesses that are not human. And then I always perceive the mind and the wind to be like inherently existent. So how do you look at that from an ultimate perspective? But thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Jennifer. Yeah, Fernando.
Hello. Well, I had two questions, but I'm going to refer to the second one. It's in relation to our consciousness here and now. It's the result of a previous moment of a series of causes and conditions, right? And so this made me think on different suppositions and hypotheses, like, does nirvana only exist because there is samsara? And then is this related to the fact that, it's mentioned in some texts that there are beings that will never be able to attain enlightenment, and then maybe it's because of them that nirvana will still exist. And then my question is, what if there would be no samsara? Would there be a nirvana?
I think when the Buddha was asked these sorts of questions, he never gave an answer, because again, we start to reify things in some way when we do that. We can say that, yes, nirvana is a state of having realized the ultimate truth about samsara, but of course it's also the ultimate truth about nirvana. So, at some level, I don't know that we can get into a place of thinking about samsara being completely removed and then nirvana no longer existing, because I don't think that that's quite what we're talking about. In terms of the state that you have attained, where you are free, where the consciousness is free of all of that, will still abide. The moments will still keep arising, because we still have consciousness. You still have the continuity of that awareness that has attained that nirvana, that is with that state of complete liberation from the afflictive obscurations, or the non-abiding nirvana that is also free from the knowledge obscurations. I mean, they are interdependent, but even the past interdependence dictates to some degree that present state. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that you need to have it present at that moment for it to necessarily fall into that category of having to depend upon something else, because it has other ways that it depends. Depends upon mere imputation, depends upon parts. It's not just in relation to something else. Some things definitely have that, like father or parent and child, right? So I'm not saying that nirvana has anything from its own side, but it still has many other levels of dependent arising that would cause it to continue to exist. In my estimation, again, I've never heard a full explanation of all this, but I guess there was a one time in the master's program where we entertained that whole idea of, is there this sort of end to all of existence? Will there be a time when all beings have attained enlightenment? We can say that every being has their own attainment of nirvana that they will eventually attain, but will all beings eventually attain nirvana? It's still a big question mark. It sounds strange, but at some level, is this even possible? I always had this idea of like a movie. Maybe somebody, if you're like a screenwriter, you can put the movie together. You can have the idea for free. It's like called The Last Bodhisattva. I mean, if you have this last person who is like the last being who has to cross that threshold, how are they going to do that? Because there's no other sentient beings. So you'd have to have you'd have to have Buddhas all appearing as suffering sentient beings in order to facilitate this movement of this being's mind to enlightenment. I don't know. I thought it was kind of an interesting little concept, but it does start entertaining that idea of, is there an end to all of this that really can be posited and established as a certainty that will happen? And the Buddha never even entertained such questions, because in his mind, was sort of like, I don't know, I mean, does it change anything if we even knew the answer to that? Because as I said, the consciousness will go on in that state of having attained that complete liberation. That's your self-purpose. Remember, when we talk about enlightenment, there's self-purpose and there's other purpose. The self-purpose is your own Dharmakaya wisdom that is manifesting in this completely pure state. And the Nirmanakaya, the Svabhavibhekakaya, which is essentially the emptiness of that mind and the freedom from all those adventitious stains. That's your own self-fulfillment, your self-purpose. The Nirmanakaya and the Sambhogakaya are the form bodies that you appear in for the benefit of other beings. If there are no other beings, well, that kind of falls away. But what happens to this? That isn't destroyed by virtue of having attained that state. In my estimation, it kind of continues on. But the Buddha never said whether this disappears. Is there a time when all the Buddhas just go to the Buddha bar and hang out, and with each other and never have to do anything again to help other sentient beings? I don't know. So, okay, thank you for that question. No, get a chance to put forward some of my ideas. These are just really kind of my hypothesizing about the stuff on the basis of the understanding that I think is correct in terms of what nirvana is, what Buddhahood is. It's not, again, just that you're this phenomenon that's only a form body dependent upon other beings to be there to help. If there are no beings there, then obviously that wouldn't be necessary, because you don't need to appear in a form to help sentient beings attain enlightenment, because they're all enlightened. But this would continue. I mean, why wouldn't it? You've created all the causes and conditions for that. That would be like a self-perpetuating thing. You just would continue to have that awareness. I don't know. Which I'm sure is a lot better, even though last week we talked about, is there this proof that, that's a blissful mind and that's something that people can actually aim to attain. I'm sure the mind is far superior to what we have now. I have no doubt. So, okay, if there are other questions, then please write them down and share them next week, because we do need to get going. We're already like 12 minutes after, and I'm getting to be really horrible about going overtime, so apologize. Let's recite these dedication prayers together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And let's just do the prayer for His Holiness, and by virtue of that, we'll include all the other beings, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, all of our precious teachers, and may all their wishes be fulfilled, and may they all have good health and long lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then make dedications for beings that you're holding in your heart right now, whoever that may be. Think that through the force of what we've done here tonight, this becomes the cause to remove them from their suffering immediately, and to help them to have all the causes of true peace and happiness. May all beings attain that through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all so much. And thank you for your patience in waiting for the files, those of you who are chomping at the bit to get files. I just last week was so crazy at my mom's and then having to leave my mom's and get back here. And this week I'll be a little better, I think, at catching up. So we'll see. But I don't have to be in any hurry because you've got 4 weeks until we meet again. So again, keep in mind that we will have some time. Certainly, if all of you wanted to meet and discuss anything in between, you can arrange that yourselves. But yeah, we won't be meeting again until November 1st. So do spend some time looking over this material and we'll reconvene. And we've got 5 Mondays in November to get through the remaining 50 or so verses. So I think we'll do okay. All right, everyone, have a good break from all of this. I'll try to be all ready to go on November 1st. My retreat goes till the 31st of October, but I think I'm going to end it like a couple of days early in order to make sure I'm hitting the ground running rather than hitting the ground and just collapsing. So, all right, everyone, be well.
Have a great retreat, Kenton.
Thank
Have
you
a
so
great
much.
Yeah.